Previously on the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
My face! My beautiful face!
And now on the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Here's a picture of a cat.
And scene!
To get all meta, but what the hell was that about?
Oh, you'll understand when you've listened to the interview I've recorded with Melina, Tsapos and Patrick Brooks.
But I have listened to it, and no, I don't understand.
Then listen again. Then listen with me.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Edison and M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy in Auckland, New Zealand. I am Josh Edison. In Guangzhou, China, they are Dr. M. R. X. Dentith. And we're going to record bugger all for this episode because the work's already been done for me. I say me because M has already done the work of recording an interview that we're going to play now.
We are.
Do we have anything to say before we get into it? And by it, I mean pausing and then recording an outro for this episode?
Well, I have one thing to say, Josh, and that is buckets.
Good. Now, I suppose we should do some intro. Pat is no stranger to this podcast, but Melina is a new voice, I believe. Can you give a bit of introduction/reintroduction to your two interlocutors?
Well, both Melina and Pat just finished their PhDs in philosophy. Melina's PhD is actually on conspiracy theory in a full sense, and that her entire PhD is on conspiracy theory. Pat's PhD touches on conspiracy theory. Both are PhDs which are largely collections of papers as opposed to what I wrote, which was a full-length dissertation. So Melina's PhD has a cuppa, which is a kind of literature review and theory introduction that goes before her papers. Pat's PhD is papers without the kind of kappa you get in a Swedish PhD. As suggested by the fact that it's a Swedish PhD, Melina did her PhD at Lund in Sweden. Pat did his PhD at Rutgers in the United States of America. I've known them both for a while now. I've known Melina slightly longer than I've known Pat, although we actually met in person. Actually, no, that's not true. I would say we met in person in the same place because we did all meet in Amsterdam at the second international conference on conspiracy theory. But I forgot that actually Melina and I met a few weeks earlier in Italy. So we actually met around about the same time, but technically I met Melina in person before I met Pat, even though it was on the same junket.
Right, so you're all a bunch of international jet-setting gadabouts. There's the message I'm taking from that.
I wouldn't say gadabouts, I'd say gadflies.
Gadflies is fine by me. So how did this interview come about? Why them, why now?
Well, actually, it came about because both Melina and Pat basically finished their PhDs at around about the same time. So Pat finished his PhD a few months before Melina finished hers. And I thought it would be interesting to talk to people who've just completed PhDs around about 10 years after I finished mine and find out what it's like to write a PhD on conspiracy theory and philosophy in the year of our Lord 2025, as opposed to what it was like to finish a PhD in the year of our Lord around about circa 2012. So that was really the entire rationale. I had two friends who had finished PhDs that either are about conspiracy theory or touch on conspiracy theory, and I wanted to find out what the difference is between when I was doing that work and how that work is being understood and done today. And because I know them both, I just flicked off an email saying, hey, wouldn't it be a great idea to do a podcast interview with the two of you? And they both immediately said, yes, that is a great idea. You are fantastic. You are the greatest philosophers ever lived. And yes, we want to be beholden to you for about an hour and a half. I may have made some of that up.
I don't believe it. Well, then in that case, let's not let's not waste any more time. Let's play a chime and then play an interview.
So today I have the great pleasure of talking with two people who have recently gained their PhDs in philosophy. One is a PhD which is on conspiracy theory quite explicitly. The other is a PhD which touches upon conspiracy theory. So I'm joined by Melina Tsapos and Patrick Brooks. Melina is in Sweden. Patrick is located somewhere within the United States. And they have recently been awarded their PhDs in philosophy. And as I say, these are PhDs either on or touching on conspiracy theories. So Pat and Melina, hello and welcome Melina to the podcast, and Pat, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me back again.
So you've both finished PhDs. The first question, why do a PhD in philosophy in the year of our Lord 2025?
You want to start with Pat, or I'll go first?
Yeah, sure, I'll start.
Okay.
Well, I think to anybody who is considering getting a PhD in philosophy in 2025, I would say, don't do it. You shouldn't do it. And you shouldn't do it because the job market is a big nightmare. Now, if you're like independently wealthy, or you just want to spend 5 to 6 years of your life having a good time reading stuff and studying up on things and maybe getting a modest stipend, then sure. But you know, people told me this when I started, and I'm just paying that forward now. I think you should do it if it's the only thing you can imagine yourself doing. It's like that. That's like Vonnegut said. If you can imagine yourself doing anything other than being a writer, you should do that. But if you can't, then well, what are you going to do?
Now, Melina, are you going to pitch up or pitch down from that answer?
Well, maybe pitch up, but following a bit on what Patrick said towards the end there, that you shouldn't definitely do it if it's not what you really, really want to do. But I still think that even if the job market is awful, maybe don't do it to get a job. That's not the smartest. Like, we've all seen these memes of, you know, philosophers that don't have a job in the end, and everybody loves to tease us about it. But I think that if you're the 4 years doing a PhD in philosophy is so fulfilling. If you really burn for philosophy, I mean, if that's a subject that you really love. And yeah, I wouldn't have done it otherwise, even if that means that I, have to work on a McDonald's or something. No, I don't think, not that that's a bad thing, but yeah. So I still think it's a worthy thing to do, or something worth to do.
Now, a slightly more specific question, why do a PhD on conspiracy theories or touching on conspiracy theories? What is it about the moment that makes conspiracy theories philosophically interesting?
I don't think it's just the moment, to be honest. Like, I think it's something that's been interesting philosophically for a very, very long time. But obviously, the increase in talking about conspiracy theories in the media and has made it interesting for many more reasons. So I don't know, for me, it was really interesting to do a PhD on the topic because I started in metaphysics and that was, I mean, it's interesting. And, I loved to think about the problems in metaphysics and so on, causation and stuff like that. But doing a PhD, I realized that it had to be something that I was really passionate about and really, really felt like I could add something to it. And I had to be, interested in it enough to want to do it for 4 years and to be thinking about it and really get to the bottom of, actually to do the subject justice in a way, And so that's how this moment, if you want to call it that, especially during COVID, when I started my PhD, I had to write the project that I wanted to do, I started. And so it was very personal in a way as well, the whole debate and discussion when the pandemic became global and how the media was treating the discussion around it. So yeah, that was why I chose that subject, because I really felt personally involved and passionate about the subject.
Now, Pat, your PhD touches on conspiracy theories, but isn't a PhD in conspiracy theories per se. It's simply one part of the package of papers you wrote. What got you into this?
Right. So for me, it's very similar to what Melina was just saying. I started off at Rutgers as a sort of hardcore philosophy of language person. My writing sample was on the semantics for gradable adjectives. So when are flat things flat and when are tall people tall? Things like that. And I really love that stuff still. But it was sort of during the pandemic for me also. And when you turn on the news or put on a YouTube video, and they would just be, the anchors would be saying things about anybody who was curious about the origins of the virus, or anybody who was, unclear about what the way forward was. That these people were, just the worst people. And for me, I was like, well, I know these people, and they're not the worst. They're actually pretty good, and they're not dumb. They're actually pretty smart. So what's going on here? Why is it that anybody who questions what's happening officially is branded as a lunatic? And so that's what sort of got me thinking about these things, was like, well, look, I know these people that are being decried as all sort of epistemically vicious. Maybe I could write something about this.
Now, I'm quite curious how your projects or your sub-projects were treated by your supervisors. So in 2007, 2008, when I'm pitching my PhD on conspiracy theories to philosophers at the University of Auckland, the general consensus by philosophers then was, why the hell would you want to write something on conspiracy theories? There's nothing epistemically interesting about this particular topic. Surely the stuff that Charles Pigden and Brian L. Keeley has written kind of just covers all the bases here. So there was actually quite a lot of effort on my part to persuade the Department of Philosophy at the University of Auckland this project is something which has legs and will produce fruitful outcomes in the future. How did your supervisors treat the idea of doing work in conspiracy theory? Melina, we'll start with you, given that your project is a big one in this area.
Right. And also, because I didn't just join a project that was already, I had to write it myself, and it had to be chosen amongst, I think it was like 40 or 50 other ones. So that was actually a big, I don't know if I should call it a risk, but it was a decision by my supervisor to want to take on this project, right? Not just me, but also the project of conspiracy theories. I think, I can't be actually more proud and happy to have had my supervisor, because it is sometimes can be a little bit of a contentious subject, even amongst philosophers. And my supervisor was super open to both at the same time trying to stay honest and true to looking at this phenomena with philosophical tools, and trying to make it more clear, so to speak, and not have this political aspect to it, even though there was, you could feel a lot of pressure sometimes from others, but never from my supervisor, to say certain things about conspiracy theories. For example, like, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but it's often grouped together with other topics like misinformation, filter bubbles, echo chambers, the fake news, all this kind of talk that came, especially after, well, my feeling is like the politics have been more, polarized, especially in the US and so on. But that never was a pressure from my supervisor. So I could stay true to, just trying to be applying really good philosophical rigor to the topic of conspiracy theories. So yeah, I've just had a really good supportive supervisor in this front. And I should also add, at around this time, he himself started to experience like having stigmatized views. So he was also experiencing kind of being a little bit excluded from the more established people or views in academia, but also in the Swedish popular culture, so to speak. So that I think also had an appeal for him to try to make it more justice, kind of.
And Pat, you were doing a perfectly normal PhD in philosophy, and then one day you go to your supervisor, hey, I've got these conspiracy theories I want to discuss. How did that conversation go down?
Well, I think I'm lucky that I was in the U.S. because, it'll be helpful for listeners that maybe know that the U.S. PhD system and the sort of broader PhD system and globally tends to be a bit different. So in the U.S., you apply for a PhD program, you'll have 2 years of coursework and then 3 to 4 years of writing your thesis. Now, it sounds like in Sweden, and I know in the UK, a lot of the times these are not taught PhDs, which is to say there's no coursework component. So
effectively in the Australasian system, for example, you do either a BA or a BA Hons. Then if you don't do a BA Hons, you do an MA, and then you go into a PhD. Whilst in your system, you essentially do the BA Hons, and then you go straight into a PhD program.
Yeah, or in my case, you do a BA and then a master's, so you can have a better chance at getting into better PhD programs. It's a whole thing. I've been in school for so long, but that's the nice thing about Rutgers is that you show up and you have 2 years of coursework, and what that means is like you don't have an advisor right away. You go in and they expect you. They suspect that you'll work on what your writing sample was on. So like I came in as a philosopher of language. But they also understand that you might take some courses and get excited about something else and then change. So you normally don't, select an advisor from amongst the faculty until your third year. So by that point, you have a little bit of rapport with some faculty. And I remember asking who became my advisor, Alex Guerrero, whether I remember emailing him something like, I would like to write a dissertation about conspiracy theory type stuff. Is that something I can even do? Like, is that reasonable? And his response was great. He was like, yeah, of course. I mean, you should work on what you want to work on. And then I think I'd like to append this to my first response about should you get a PhD? If you're going to, you should work on something you really want to work on. If you're going to write a dissertation, it should be on something that you think is awesome and it's really exciting, as Melina said. And so that was the advice I got. And he was actually very cool with working with me on this stuff. And I sent him some papers and some ideas, and we met like every couple of weeks, and it was great. It was super helpful. He's a very yes and kind of advisor. I think other people's mileage may vary with their advisors, but yeah, I had a super positive experience. Everybody on my committee was interested and super on board. Yeah, it was cool. It was very cool to see that, especially a place like Rutgers, which has a reputation for not being so like that.
Now, I'm curious to see, when I did my PhD, literature on conspiracy theories in philosophy was quite small. I've always joked you could basically read all the papers written at the time I started my work, 2007-ish, over the course of a weekend. I don't think that's true now. What was it like having the idea of writing something on the philosophy of conspiracy theory, and were you aware there was a literature, or did you discover there was a literature when you went, oh, this is a cool concept to look at? So, Melina, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I started actually when I got the idea to write my project proposal on conspiracy theory. So that's when I started looking up, because I'm like, surely there must be something in philosophy. But I'm a little bit surprised now that I had no idea. I had never even looked into it before. And the sad part is that one of the first writings that I encountered were from Qasim Qassam. But the really, really good news is that straight after that was your book, The Philosophy on Conspiracy Theories. So I was really happy that at least there existed some literature that was challenging to what, this mainstream view of conspiracy theories that we hear about. So I was happy that, there seemed to be philosophers. Like then I discovered, of course, Brian Keeley's paper and Lee Basham, as you mentioned them. And then, of course, more of your papers. But the literature, how it's changed. I mean, of course, there is so much. But I also feel like maybe probably it's nothing compared to how you feel, but I feel like it's really exploded even more since COVID or when I started even just looking into it. So especially within philosophy, I feel like there's so many papers coming out all the time. Good. I think it's a really good thing, because if I feel maybe a bit optimistically that it's getting better and better. So I feel like the field is getting more, it's really an opportunity to make it more interesting than, more just, bashing on conspiracy theories, so to speak.
Yeah, what Charles Pigton calls the conventional wisdom, that everyone thinks that conspiracy theories are necessarily bad, doesn't seem to be the kind of emergent consensus view, at least we're seeing in philosophy at this time. Although, of course, there is a side issue here about what's going on outside of philosophy, which we'll come back to in just a moment. But yeah, Pat, how was your experience of finding out or interpreting the literature?
I mean, it was kind of exactly the same as Melina's. I had this idea that like, oh, I'd like to write about conspiracy theories. And then a friend of mine at IU, I was talking to who we were at Texas Tech together, sent me a link to Kassam's book. He was like, oh, you should have a look at this book. It's on conspiracy theories. Because that's one thing that happens that like this doesn't happen with any other discipline, I don't think, or any other like subfield. It's just people just send me random conspiracy theory stuff at all times. They're like, hey, have you looked at this? So I read Kassam's book and I was like, wow, this is not good. But fortunately, it was a pathway to some other voices in the literature. And I think, I read your Palgrave book, your first one from 2014 or whatever.
Yeah, the Palgrave Macmillan book. Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, I got hipped to the David Cody edited volume, The Conspiracy Theories, The Philosophical Debate, which I have a hard copy of that I paid like $60 for.
Right, yeah, I'll say I also have a hard copy. It's now been reprinted as a much cheaper softback, but when I bought my copy in 2008, it was 110 New Zealand dollars. So I spent an absolute fortune on something which I suddenly realized most of this is made up of papers that have been published that I could download on the university intranet for free. But yes, I have a hard copy as well.
Actually, I have your book, the one Taking Conspiracy Theories Seriously, because I really wanted to buy, of course, your 2014 one as well, but that was ridiculously expensive, so I couldn't afford that one. But Taking Conspiracy Theories Seriously, I'm really, really happy about that one because I can't access all of the papers in there as papers online. So yeah, that's a really good one to have as well.
Yeah, so I read through your book, Em, and then I was like, this is much like this is what I sort of some of the things I've been thinking about, and this seems reasonable. And then I read through the Cody anthology, so I read Charles' paper, and then the Lee Basham stuff and the David Cody stuff, and I liked all that pretty good. And then I think I got into the conspiracy theory social group, the reading group that we do, pretty early on, because you were a keynote at a conference that I presented at on Zoom in Ireland.
Oh, and yes. When
you invited me,
yeah, I was in the quarantine hotel in Guangzhou when that conference was going on. So I spent 3 weeks in one room, and that conference was one of the highlights because it gave me something to do in that hotel room for a day and a half.
Yeah, so that's when I got into the conspiracy reading group shortly after that, and then that was a nice steady stream of literature there too, and then then you discover Joe Yasinski and other edited volumes and this and that, and,
Can I just say though, I just now when I was finishing my thesis and I had to write something in Swedish, what we call kappa, like the introduction to the papers that I have in my thesis. And I went back to your book, the 2014 one. And it's really cool to see how, it still holds really, really well today. I don't know if it's because that book maybe set the tone for a lot of the debate and the discussion going forward, or if it's like you already nailed it from the beginning, that was kind of, you raised so many of the issues with conspiracy theories and also with how it is being studied and so on, that is still, on point still today.
That was a sponsored plug for the philosophy of conspiracy theories.
No, I just, because I wanted to even tell you that, because I really still use that as a reference writing the introduction. So I was like, shit, you already had everything in 2014.
I have read your Kappa, and I am quite pleased by the number of times I get cited throughout. Although it does mean I end up skimming over parts, going, all right, now Melinda's talking about my work. I'll skip to the next paragraph. Sorry, Pat, you're about to say something.
I will say, if we're doing praise for the 2014 book, I will say I remember starting reading it and thinking pretty quickly, like, well, this means that birthday parties count as conspiracy theories. And then, like, the next paragraph, you were like, this means that birthday parties count as conspiracy theories. And I'm fine with that. And I was like, okay, I appreciate, like, so often people don't see the bullets they have to bite and just ignore them. And you did not do that. And I was like, all right, this is good. I'm enjoying.
You might be the only person who agrees with me on that particular issue. Other people continue, it's too broad, and I go, no,
No, we have to have a very minimal definition of conspiracy. We have to admit that conspiracies are ubiquitous. And yes, your friends are conspiring against you when they want to organize you a good time.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Because I mean, this is maybe a bit more substantive than we wanted to go on this podcast. But I think that you can append other conditions for the purposes so in my first paper, I take your definition and I go, well, but we're going to talk about these specific subclass of these, which are the contrarian ones. And I think that's a totally fine thing to do. We do it with other subfields all the time. So we start broad and then we sort of append conditions where conditions need appended and then remove them when they need removing. I think that's totally fine.
Well, yes, because Melina, in your Kappa, you kind of you decide to eventually confront me and go, well, actually, Dentith's definition of conspiracy theory is a little bit too broad. We need to bring in a kind of proviso that it's against the interest of others. And I think that's a perfectly fine thing to do if we want to narrow a concept down to then go, well, look, when we're talking about conspiracy theories, we tend to be talking about political conspiracy theories, or we tend to be talking about conspiracy theories with a particular feature, because it allows us to then apply the concept more easily to certain types of debates.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course the big risk of pejorative, right? So that I'm kind of totally agreeing with that. That's a really bad idea to just make it a pejorative and to think about it like that. But as Pat was saying as well, of course, I agree with both of you here that you can start with a perfectly broad definition and then narrow into whatever and define it more specifically to whatever purpose it is that you're after. But I think still that including birthday parties, it's almost touching on changing the subject, at least considering what we're talking about, what most of us seem to be interested in when we're talking about conspiracy theories. I think even both of you, I don't have this knockdown argument on what exactly is different, like evolutionarily or something like that. But when I say that it's against someone's interest, it's this capability of reasoning when you have reason to suspect someone doing something against your interest. I think there is a slight difference there than just in the positive, because people do things, in secret all the time maybe that's a positive for us. Like, the Secret Service, for example. It's not the same thing as when we're suspecting them of doing something. I think that's a slightly different phenomenon, but yeah.
Pat, do you have a response to that? I'm sorry, I'm turning this into a debate now. Now we'll turn to the representative from America for a response on this particular contentious issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. I do think as an interesting consequence, it would seem as though a surprise party can count as a conspiracy theory depending upon how one feels about surprise parties.
Yeah. That's true, though. Yeah.
So maybe it's a little. Maybe this is a nice bridging sort of.
I think that's actually in the acknowledgements of the 2014. So one of the persons who helped me copy edit that book is now a Green Party activist and wannabe MP for the Green Party back home in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And she pointed out that if anyone ever organised a surprise party for her, she would be absolutely livid at the idea. She does not want any surprise parties at all. So organising a surprise party would be against her interest. And he goes, I just think that would be, they would be conspiring against me even if they wanted to give me the best time possible. Psychologically, my immediate response was, you bastards.
I that's under my definition of conspiracy theory, definitely. Yeah. So in that sense, yes. So surprise birthday party can still be a conspiracy theory. It's just the positive aspect of it. So I think because you mentioned in the 2014, like you include things as what is it called, the park, the Leichen Park,
Bletchley Park. So the code. Well, amongst the things we know the people at Bletchley Park did was the code breaking of Enigma. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of other stuff they also did, which is still under the Official Secrets Act in the UK and won't be revealed until halfway through the century. But yeah, they were involved in, I would argue, a conspiracy against the Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. So for the Nazis, if they thought about that, or if they reasoned about the British doing this, it would definitely be a conspiracy theory that they were speculating. But I think for a normal British person living, next door or something, where they were doing this project. I don't think for them being suspicious about it, or like not suspicious, but kind of having a hunch that it's happening, I don't think that it's a conspiracy theory in the same way. I think there's a fundamental difference there.
And I mean, this might be getting into a kind of interesting debate about whether there is a kind of common language or ordinary understanding of what both a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory is, which of course is a big issue in the wider literature, which is why I think it's really interesting, Melina, in your Kappa, you don't just talk about the philosophical work on conspiracy theory. You also take a bit of a deep dive into work in the social sciences and psychology as well. What was that like, getting into that literature along with the philosophical stuff?
Very frustrating sometimes, to be honest. I felt like it was very messy and kind of sometimes it felt like it was out of control, just trying to even understand the different terminology that was being used. One uses conspiracism for one thing, and then, and then some of them, when you start off reading it, they even agree with philosophers on, this simple definition, and they provide a definition, but then they just don't stick to it when they're actually doing the research. And it's like nobody even realizes that this is problematic. So, I mean, yeah, it was frustrating, but also I think in a lot of ways helpful, trying to understand how I think about it and why, trying to sort out why I thought it was so problematic was really, in the end, a learning experience. Yeah.
And here's a potentially problematic question. Is there anything in the social sciences and psychology that philosophers should be paying attention to when talking about conspiracy theory?
I think so. I mean, that's why also I'm interested in it, because I think sometimes philosophers don't engage with the empirical sciences or the social sciences on this topic, and on many other topics as well, for that matter. And I'm of that maybe sometimes controversial opinion that philosophers, I think we can do better philosophy if we do pay attention to that as well, and we're informed by it a bit. And so I think that's a really good question. What is it that we need to pay attention to now? Maybe just that, this cognitive difference or psychological difference between, for example, somebody just suspecting some secret activity versus the suspiciousness that some people have. What kind of difference does that make? Especially this trust, the question of trust, and that is an empirical question that could be, investigated, and how that plays a part. That should definitely be taken into account in philosophy. I'm not saying it's not being done, but that is something that we should look at also and acknowledge.
And I mean, there is something interesting in the social sciences and psychology about the character of the conspiracy theorist. So often the work in the social sciences and psychology isn't actually strictly on conspiracy theories per se. It's beliefs expressed by people that we often pejoratively call conspiracy theorists. And that, I think, brings us quite nicely, Pat, to your contribution here, because you have a rather interesting paper in your PhD project looking at what appears to be a kind of intractable kind of conspiracy theorist. So can you tell us a little bit about the work you did in your PhD on conspiracy theories?
Yeah, so the first paper I wrote, and the paper that people who listen to this podcast will have heard me talk about before, is this On the Origin of Conspiracy Theories paper, which sort of attempts to explain why people, or offer an explanation for why people posit some conspiracy theories. And essentially it's this idea, as many of you probably remember, people have certain expectations for how things ought to go when they ask questions about things. And when those expectations are frustrated or fail to be met, they wonder why that might be the case. And for a various number of reasons, one thing that they wind up wondering might be a conspiracy theory. So that's sort of that was the genesis of the whole dissertation project, actually, is that there seems to be this thing that happens where we have worldviews about like how things ought to go in the sciences and with respect to politics and so on and so forth. And I call these in the dissertation political paradigms. And essentially it's a worldview into which you're born and which you're raised. And it sort of tells you what to expect, right? Like how the world ought to go, what kinds of things there are and what kinds of things there's not. what processes are reasonable methods to solve problems, which ones aren't, and so on and so forth. And I think these really shape how we view the world. And when, and they're pretty ready-made, and they're fairly workaday, and they're meant to be sort of coarse-grained enough to apply to a bunch of situations. And nevertheless, you have these situations in which the world fails to accord with what you expect. It's just like in the sciences, right? We're going to see such and such. We didn't see such and such. Well, now what do we do? I think the same thing happens in the politics case. We were meant to see such and such. We didn't see such and such. Well, what's going on? Now what do we do? And I think people have these really strong worldviews. And when anomalies happen, they begin to wonder what explains the anomalies. And I think those things can be conspiracy theories. And I think at the same time, you wind up having people in sort of opposite political paradigms, just like with, sort of competing scientific paradigms at which, these paradigms become incommensurable, as Kuhn talks about, which is to say that there's no common language into which both could be translated such that you could communicate across these lines. And then you just wind up with like hyperpolarization, where people with one paradigm, say people who have like a very America good paradigm are going to think various sorts of things about various sorts of things, and people who have abandoned that paradigm in favor of some version of an America is bad paradigm are going to think all sorts of other things. And never the twain shall meet, sadly. I think we're all I think it's game, set, match here before too long. And I think you're going to have really intractable conspiracy theories about other groups across those lines. And I think just polarization is going to get worse and worse, and it's going to be no good. But I don't want to bring us down too much.
Yeah, and that's where the psychologizing or the social science explanations of people being conspiracy theorists either complement the work that's being done in philosophy, or kind of start being torn apart by the kinds of analyses we do. So if you take it that being a conspiracy theorist is a rational response with respect to certain phenomena, but it turns out the literature is psychologizing that response instead, then you kind of get this mismatch between the kind of work that's been done in philosophy and maybe been done in social psychology.
Yeah, and just one more quick thing. Like, I think an important question that social psychologists could maybe address is just suppose there's some conspiracy mindset or one of these, these structures that they talk about. What's the base rate occurrence of that? Because that's an interesting question, right? And, you might imagine that in a perfect society, right, one in which like there is no mismatch between how we think the world ought to be and how it is, that there would still nevertheless be some conspiracy theorists. Right, there would be some people who were like, I don't know, seems fishy to me. And I think it'd be interesting to know what the base rate occurrence of that kind of person is, because it seems like a lot of the stuff that the three of us have given out about in social psychology would nevertheless apply to that small number of people who are legitimately suffering from some psychological pathology such that they see conspiracy theories or conspiracies where there are none. I think the three of us would agree also that, like, what's more interesting is the number of people who would not otherwise think there are conspiracies who nevertheless think there are conspiracies. That's like the cool group. That's the interesting group that needs theorizing about, because I think those things tell us something about society. Whereas, the people who are going to wear tinfoil hats, regardless of whether a tinfoil hat is required, well, that's not super interesting. Of course, there are crazy people. There will always be crazy people, but we shouldn't start there and then theorize inward and apply that to everybody. That seems like a bad move to me, and one the social psychologists often make.
Yeah, I think the question about the base rate and the kind of the background noise of conspiracy in society is something which we probably can never get to the actual number of, but we can have suspicions about it maybe being varying over time. Sorry, Melina, you were about to interject.
Yeah, just if I can add to my previous answer as well, just on this point, because of how I see what is interesting to study and what we can learn from the social sciences is that it is a social phenomena, I think, in the end, conspiracy theories. And the interesting part about how we reason on these social events and social structures that we have established in society. So I think that's something unique about conspiracy theorizing. And so just as you said, that's why the focus is on conspiracy theorists. a lot from the psychologist viewpoint. And if I can also just plug that into my framework, what I'm arguing there is that you could look at all these things, like also the pathology can be interesting to look at. Like, what is it that we have in common, for example? I mean, so not we, but normal people that reason on social events. So when it comes to trust issues or people that just want to come to the bottom of things because we know that conspiracies do happen, how those are correlated or not correlated at all, in what situations are there any connections or not. And also with the pathologies, like we see in dementia patients, for some reason it's the prefrontal cortex pathologies that seem to be more conspiratorial. And I think that's fascinating because on the flip side, we see that that's the last thing to develop in children, being able to think and reason conspiratorially, especially when it comes to institutions or authority. And so if there's a connection there, maybe, I think that can teach us a lot about both the human mind and also rationality and so on. So I think that is an interesting perspective. That is different. I think that is different from, for example, just looking at or what other scientists are doing, looking at phenomena in the world.
Yeah, looking at the actual developmental neurology of the human being, go, well, look, actually, there are some interesting parallels, both in cognitive development and cognitive decline. Actually does tell us something interesting about individuals, but it only tells us about them as theorists. It doesn't tell us much about the theories themselves.
Right, exactly. But it is reasoning on conspiracy theories. So it's not the truth or falsehood of the theory itself, but conspiracy theories are, even whether they're true or false, are, I believe, reasoning, social reasoning, which is different than trying to reason on, for example, I don't know, if atoms are, dividable or not, or whatever, some kind of scientific question. I can't make one up right now. That's interesting. But I don't know, like, for example, figuring out if the earth is flat or not. I think that's a different kind of reasoning that is applied.
Pat, thoughts?
I think no, mostly because I haven't read your thesis, Melina, and I don't want to so I do wonder though, like, different kind of reasoning in, I guess, in what way? Like reasoning with different kind of premises, or reasoning in a different kind of, like, reasoning inductively and abductively rather than like just going and checking, or
no, because
I just wonder what you mean.
Yeah, so what I mean is that, for example, if I want to find out if the earth is flat or not, typically you would be motivated by that, epistemically motivated to find out the truth if the earth is flat or not. But I think with conspiracy theories, because they're essentially social, there is a lot of things, for example, trust, or like you might not even be able to get to the bottom of it. So you have to take somebody's word for it. If the conspirators already are all dead, or, you will never, or potential conspirators, might never even be able to find out that question. Typically, that's not the case with questions, scientific questions, right? Normally, you would have some kind of way of trying to figure it out. That doesn't include this social part, this social cognitive aspect that is required when we do reason about social circumstances and social events.
But I mean, that's also going to be the same for historical theorizing, to a large extent economic theorizing as well, because you're right. To go back to Brian Keeley, electrons don't lie about their superposition. It either is or it isn't. Human beings, of course, can lie about where they were on the night of November the 3rd, 1963. There are interesting aspects to the way these stories are told, because in the sciences we are dealing with what we take to be cold hard facts about the world, which are inviolate. They either are or they aren't. Whilst when we're dealing with social phenomena, we're dealing with events which, on a metaphysical sense, happened or didn't happen, but often reported through the lens of human beings who are, to a certain extent, unreliable narrators even of their own lives.
Yeah, and also I think that it is part of how we come to know things or reason around social. This kind of things that do involve other humans, for example, that is different from just solely wanting to reflect on facts, right? Just exactly like you said, an electron won't lie to you. So It's just up to
Or
you
at
to
least
find.
that's what the electrons want us to think.
That's true.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is like, so I view, I mean, I'm a Kuhnian about this stuff. So I view science as an essentially social practice also. So for me, like, yeah, there are truths about some of these things. But I think science is a social practice just in the same way that other kinds of theorizing are social practices. So I wonder what that would mean for how much our views come apart, but I feel like that's probably a conversation for another time.
But it's actually a really good point. It did become quite contentious during my defense. Exactly that thing. So, yeah.
Now, I'm right in thinking you get a sword after you complete your PhD in Sweden?
No, that's Finnish people. That's in Finland.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's all right. So I had to get my honorary doctorate in Finland. Okay.
Or like we get a golden ring, which is really beautiful because it's like you're wed to university. So
as opposed to a ring which then binds you to the Dark Lord Sauron.
In the land of Mordor, where the shadow.
Yes, become runner. You are one of the ring wraiths now. Okay, all right. So finish honorary PhD, get sword, have to somehow persuade Juha Riker to endorse my work. Okay, work to be done there. Work to be done there. And I think that brings us on quite nicely. What do you think happens next in the philosophy of conspiracy theory? Have we kind of covered all of our bases? Or is there more work to be done? Pat, I'll start with you.
So I think there's still more work to be done. I mean, hopefully for all of us, there's still more work to be done. I think that two things are true. I think that with the increased awareness of our little cottage industry, we're going to see more and more papers in print that are retreading old ground, but hopefully in a new and interesting way that will give us something to respond to in new and interesting ways. I don't think that will be like there will be a ton of that. I think a lot of them will be frustrating for us to look at, but I do think there will be the occasional one where we're like, "Hey, we hadn't thought of that. That's pretty good. What should the particularist or the social theorist say about this?" So I think that's one thing, and I do think that there are some remaining puzzles. I think that the reconciling generalism and particularism is a remaining puzzle. I think there's some way of doing that. I don't know what it is, but I think that there's. Most people that I meet out in the wild just think that we're engaged in a linguistic dispute. And I think there might be something to that. And I think something like that might be worth exploring. And I think there's just a bunch of empirical questions about where people believe conspiracy theories and why they believe them. And if we can make any sort of interesting correlational observations about these different societies and things like this. So I think there's more to be said. I think there's a lot of long-standing sort of canards, like this idea about like, well, you shouldn't believe in conspiracy theories because like 30 or 40 people would have to keep it a secret for a long time. And I think that's probably like, well, there's papers that suggest that like that's not actually that big a deal. So I think there's lots of stuff for us to do.
Yes, so one day I'm going to put a generalist hat on and probably write anonymously a pro-generalism paper along the lines of, I think there's a kind of what we might call cultural generalism. In particular cultures with particular kinds of political arrangements, I think citizens in those cultures are entitled to a general dismissal and suspicion of things labeled as conspiracy theories by the institutions that make up those particular cultures. The kicker for such a paper is I don't think we have any societies currently which satisfy the criteria to license that kind of cultural generalism. But that's a paper for a future time, and now I've revealed it in a podcast, so basically someone can now write it.
But even so, I still think the problem is when they're so worried about epistemically, that it's an epistemic problem, right? That there are voices that are sort of saying, like contradicting what the mainstream are saying, even if, they're not 100% warranted. I think that's an even bigger problem. This trying to silence contradictory views, trying to think that or argue that it's epistemically bad for for us. Anyway, so you can argue that paper, but I will still argue against that.
I'm going to write it anonymously, so you'll never know it was me, despite the fact that I just told you that it is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, it has to be super.
And the thing is, then the journal will send it to me, and I'll give it a withering review. Okay, well, this is a pathetic paper. It ignores most of the particulars. Literature. How can someone even argue a position like this? It'll be fun all the way through.
That's really fun.
You'll have to undergo that thing that they do in that show Severance, where like you're half particularist and half generalist.
Oh,
No
so
continuity.
I've got an innie generalist and an outie particularist. Oh, now that, and then I could be my own critic. This is a great idea.
Just responding to yourself ad infinitum.
You're gonna have forever.
It's one way to get your H index up.
But yeah, on the question of what's still left to be done, I'm also a bit optimistic now, maybe a bit like Pat, because recently the papers that I've gotten to review have been surprising to me. How it's starting to, it feels like the literature is starting to get more focused, and the arguments are getting actually worked at. So for all these issues that have been debated and argued a lot, I feel like the arguments, the actual philosophical arguments, are getting more and more polished. So it's kind of like we had to have all this, arguing back and forth, but it feels like it's getting more and more mature, so that we can have real good arguments, and maybe like even names for them, so we can have shorthands and don't have to have like a million examples every time somebody disagrees with a particular conspiracy theory, but we can use like standardized examples. Maybe this is just my wish, so we can skip a lot of the steps that have already been, established and argued, to sort of like all other areas in philosophy. I wish we could move more towards that. And it feels like we are slowly, but at least in that direction. So I still think there's a lot of work to do, and I'm maybe a bit optimistically hopeful that we are moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Yes, it would be quite nice if in a few years' time we don't have to, particularism, a term introduced by Booting and Taylor back in 2007, that we don't need to do that constant, these people originated name. Go, no, this is just a standard term when it comes to talking about conspiracy theory in philosophy at this time. It'd also be quite nice if people outside of philosophy also started using some of that terminology as well. I mean, it's interesting. We are seeing the reinvention of particularism going on in psychology at the moment. So a lot of the work that Roland Imhoff is doing, for example, pointing out that a conspiracy mentality doesn't just predict people believing in unwarranted conspiracy theories. It also predicts people believing in warranted conspiracy theories as well. It means we're seeing a kind of particular stance coming out by at least some psychologists now. And if they just adopted the terminology from philosophy, and we all know that these psychologists at least know of that terminology, given that we have associated with or corresponded with them in the past, it might make life easier for everyone in general.
Exactly. And also, if I can add to that, it feels like the subject or the topic is getting to shine and develop in its own as well. Like, so I feel like before it was very much tied to, misinformation and this whole other baggage of problematic views, so to speak. But I feel like it's also interesting and becoming more interesting as just in and of itself, like conspiracy theories as a topic, without having to, conflate it with echo chambers or something else that people are interested in.
Yeah, and there is an increasingly kind of interdisciplinary aspect to conspiracy theory as it's developing now. And hopefully philosophy can kind of take a central role in helping people to navigate through the metaphysical and epistemic aspects of what count as conspiracy theories and what makes belief rational or irrational in those theories at particular times or in particular cultures. Actually, so on the example of examples, what do we think of the kind of examples that are being used in the literature? So the kind of motivating examples that people use to develop their theory of conspiracy theories. Because, Pat, you have quite an interesting discussion in your first paper on conspiracy theories of views which most people would go, oh, well, that's a bit weird. But you do the defense saying, well, look, actually, given a particular context of people seeing responses by ostensible authorities in the world, these views aren't actually all that weird given expectations as to how we think the world generally should work.
Yeah, so I think in the paper I used like the Roswell example where, like, you know, I think it's all very twee now and very funny to think about. Like, there's aliens, really? They crash landed 70 years ago. Like, come on. But when you look at the story, right? Like, and I think this is a thing that people don't do enough of in their papers, which is like really get into the particulars of the theories that we're talking about. Because I think once one understands some of these theories, or at least understands them in like sort of fairly fine-grained strokes, you know, I think they make some sense, right? Like, if you were following the Roswell thing, for example, then you say you were following it in the 50s. You're like, oh my gosh, there's, you know, the Roswell paper said that something crash landed in this guy's field and it was a spaceship. And, you know, this is like, you got to keep in mind, this is like the height of like the hard science fiction. so something crashed in somebody's field and it was a spaceship, and the Army's like, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It was this. And then you're like, oh, maybe it wasn't that. Maybe it was whatever they said it was. And then like a year later, they're like, actually, it was this other thing. And you're like, whoa, really? And then a few years after that, they're like, actually, it was the first thing. And you're like, all right, now you're trying to wind me up. Like, if you were invested in this story and the story kept changing, I mean, look, if you were hanging out with your buddies and one of your friends told you a story, and then the next time they told you that story, they changed a bunch of things, and then the next time they told you that story, they changed a bunch of things back, you'd be like, this son of a bitch is lying to me.
Or they were very drunk both times.
Yeah, or that, yeah. And I mean, presumably the whole, you know, Pentagon wasn't drunk.
I don't know. It was the 1960s, Pat. It was the 1960s.
This is true. But I think, like, and I think this is like, I think Brian talks about this in his first in his first conspiracy theory paper, the of conspiracy theories one, about this anomaly stuff. But, you know, it's not as though these are like, the thing to do with anomalous things isn't to just, you know, make something up and then change your story later. And I think if you look into these things and you're like, well, why was all the ATF out of the Murrah building in late April 95? Like, what was the story with that? And you look at that in the backdrop of, you know, Ruby Ridge and Waco, and you're like, boy, the ATF sure had a reputational problem. Maybe they were going to try to stop this. You know, it's one of these things, like, if you get into them and you read what these people are saying and you kind of tilt your head and squint, you can see what they're up to. And the fact that you can do that with you know, varying degrees of head tilting and squinting, I think is interesting, and I think is worth noting. It's not as though these people, you know, I think example-wise, you know, we just say things like, and we've all complained about this before, we say things like 9/11 conspiracy theories. Well, which one? Do we mean Project Bluebeam? Because that's nuts. Do we mean a let it happen on purpose? Because that's less nuts. Like, which of these things do people think and why? I think are super important questions. And I think at the level of example, things we could be getting more mileage out of than what we are. That's my hobby horse.
I mean, just to go back to the Oklahoma City bombing, also one of the things which strikes non-Americans when you tell the story about the Alfred Murrah building being blown up is their first response is normally, sorry, there's a Bureau for Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. So there's a federal agency that deals with those three things together. Sorry, you're making this bit up, right? So there are also, I think, from outside of the US, there are certain aspects of the story which make people go, well, there's something really seriously wrong with American society. When you have a bureau's what? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms? How did that come about?
I agree with you guys, but I also see it a little bit differently, this getting the mileage out of the particular conspiracy theories. Of course, I think the details are really important, but that's what I meant. Like, I'm hoping, or I think it would be awesome if we could somehow shorthand our examples. So to mean exactly what we mean when we talk about them, instead of like it shouldn't be expected that people should look into the details of whatever happened if they want to talk about it as true or false. That's I think already said and done in philosophy. But take the Roswell example. Maybe that could be the case that we use when we argue about, constant changing narratives as problematic, and why people don't trust, the institutions or something like that. Or let's say the 9/11, when we talk about 9/11 conspiracy theories, maybe should be like a standard example for when we talk about official conspiracy theories versus unofficial conspiracy theories, to highlight that problem or intuition that, sometimes people get wrong. Versus when we're talking about 9/11, but Building 7, maybe that's a different example, that shows some different kind of argument in philosophy. Yeah, do you guys follow? And maybe like another example could be the JFK assassination. When people talk about, whatever the Pope had for breakfast, or whatever color the Pope had on compared to the socks that the killer or the shooter was wearing, something like that. There was some kind of, like, maybe that's an example of, using evidence that's not even relevant, or evidence that's not relevant. That's what I meant by standardizing the examples, so that for us who are actually researching this, we don't have to talk, because I feel like sometimes philosophers love to get into the lengthy details of particular conspiracy theories. I think that's really interesting and good in a podcast or in other forms of media. But in philosophy, when we want to get to the arguments about what we're talking about, it's not so much the actual conspiracy theory, but the point that we're trying to make with talking about that example. Do you see what I mean? Like, why I think it would be beneficial for philosophy and more efficient? I mean,
it would be nice if there were a canonical list of examples, so that when we talk about a let it happen on purpose versus made it happen on purpose 9/11 conspiracy theory, we can say, well, look, the Lee Hop example, C. Clark 2025, or the made it happen on purpose example, C. Hagen 2023. You had a list of canonical examples to then index things to. I guess the problem is we would then need that to be done across disciplines, because we do see examples of scholars outside of philosophy and inside of philosophy who will then say, as the Woodward and Bernstein investigation of Watergate show, this was not a conspiracy theory because, and then you go, but hold on, they're referencing all the president's men here. And all the president's men, Woodward and Bernstein admit they were speculating wildly for the first 6 months of their investigation. So they were indeed engaging in conspiracy theorizing. So if we want to have canonical examples, I mean, it'd be great to have them within philosophy, but we then need to kind of have canonical examples outside of philosophy, so that when we're hinging our critiques of people using examples in different ways, we go, well, look, there's a big difference between Karen Douglas talking about this example and Lee Basham talking about this example, and that might explain their different theoretical perspective or through point.
Yeah, I would say, too, that, so this is going to sound like a tangent, but I swear to God it's not. So in Ted Sider's book, Logic for Philosophers, in the beginning, he talks about, why you should learn a bunch of formalism. And his argument is, you want to do this so you don't get formally bullied, right? You don't want to, pick up a paper about Bayesian epistemology and go, well, I don't know what they're saying, so I guess I'll just go with it, right? You want to have enough chops to be able to make it through this stuff so people just can't bully you with formalism. And I think the same is kind of true with some of these examples, at least for now, right? You want to be conversant enough in the popular kinds of examples that people use so that you have something to say when some generalist makes up some unreal conspiracy theory and goes, see, look how dumb these people are. You want to be able to go, no, well, that's a fictional thing that you italicized and indented and then told a little tale. But here's a real example from the real world. And here are the details that matter. And I think for now, I think we kind of need that. But I do agree, Melina, that it would be good if we could settle on some, when I say that P, I mean this.
Exactly. But I think very, very small baby steps are still made that way. When I think philosophers successfully argued that, hammering home the point that some conspiracies do turn out to be true. And I think that the Watergate scandal is a good example, because we see that all the time now, even in psychology, where they say that excluding true conspiracies, like the Watergate, So we do see that popping up. And I think it is because philosophers have successfully argued and used the example of the Watergate scandal. So if we can just do that with other things as well, like other examples, and because I just feel like sometimes some people just enjoy talking too much about the details of the conspiracy theories, which is fine. And you know, I think it's really fun too. I just think it's like not advancing necessarily the study of conspiracy theories. If we just talk about, you know, different conspiracy, because it's going to keep popping up new ones. Like now we have the Charlie Kirk conspiracy theories, and some of them are just the same thing, but with different examples. So if we can categorize that, I think it would be super interesting.
On that, I agree. I think a taxonomy of like, oh, that's a type B conspiracy. That's a, that's one of those, it's the Jews conspiracies. Like, so we don't need to worry about that. Like, that would be great.
Or like, not just that we don't need to worry about that. It's just that we know, it's like a shorthand. We know what we're talking about. We know which arguments to address, because, otherwise people like us, we have to keep arguing over and over and over with new examples. And I mean, of course that's what will eventually make the argument, being established, that we do rehash it many times. Maybe it's just part of the project and the process. But I'm just saying that I wish we were maybe trying to pay attention to it, that there are certain things that do keep repeating themselves and we don't have to rehash them every single time. I mean, I'm sure Em can attest to this being, the patience that you have sometimes is, I'm in awe of it. So yeah, you must have heard this many, many more years than I have. So,
but hey, the cynical view is that, hey, this is job security, right? Like the more times we have to say the same stuff over and over again in print, like the higher our H indices get. So
yeah, that's true. I still think that will be necessary. But I just think, maybe I'm comparing it too much to like the philosophy of mind, because if you go through the philosophy of mind, there is certain examples that you just know straight away, thought experiments that in philosophy, we use those to know what we're talking about. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. And then once people learn that, they don't have to keep, okay, maybe you're right. I'm trying to get rid of our jobs, but I think we can still get to more interesting things if we can establish those things. So like, let's say, John Searle's Chinese room argument. We all know, okay, it has to do with syntax and semantics. Like that's the distinction that example is made for, to make that distinction clear. So maybe we can say the same thing with like, okay, 9/11 conspiracies. It's to make the distinction between conspiracy theories that are official and not official, just things like that. Yeah. But you're right. Maybe, I think we still will need to explain this to people over and over and over again. So
I think we're in a bit of a rough spot in that regard, just because this stuff is like, it is so tangible and there are so many examples out there. Like, of course, yeah, I think you're right about thought experiments in philosophy. Like, Parfit, like the teleporter stuff from Parfit is like, yeah, like that gets at a bunch of like interesting theoretical stuff. But like, what's interesting is like probably a lot of the epistemological things that we're getting at with our conspiracy examples are probably easily gotten to by other examples in epistemology from before. That would be an interesting paper, right? Like going like, okay, we have these things in epistemology that we think. In what way are these cases similar to these other things? And maybe that might be the thing, is to get away from examples altogether and go back to things that were in sort of moldy oldie epistemology. Because I would imagine that a lot of this stuff is represented in like Hume and Reid and, Gettier stuff.
Well, yeah, I can imagine someone writing a paper on Watergate going, well, look, was Woodward and Bernstein's hunch investigative justification, or was it epistemic luck? Did they just happen to luck onto a story? Or was their institutional background as journalists sufficient to go, there's something fishy about the story that's been told there? So do a epistemic luck versus institutionalized accreditation and thus generating justification or warrant that way. So yeah, there probably is some really interesting work there. And I do think we're seeing that in the literature now, because the explosion of work we've seen in the last few years is a lot of people who are not necessarily interested in the epistemology of conspiracy theory, but interested in some other side debates going on in philosophy. And they go, oh, we can apply that to conspiracy theory. And sometimes it's a quite happy marriage. It matches quite nicely. And other times you read those papers going, my God, you had to stretch that example 3 different ways from Sunday to be able to make the point you wanted to make, and nobody's going to agree with you because of it. Talking about examples, are there little known examples from either your experience or your part of the world that you think actually it would be useful for people to think about when talking or analysing conspiracy theories? I, of course, have talked about the North Head example, so the hidden military base in a small suburb of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, back home, which is one of those examples which, if someone mentions North Head in their paper, you can pretty much guarantee it's going to be me, because I'm the only person who mentions it. But yeah, examples that are little known to the world that you think would be interesting things for people to talk about, or at least consider when talking about conspiracy theory.
I have 2 that I think about. Okay, so the first one, I'm not sure how unknown it is, but I do like to mention it a lot, and I don't hear a lot of other people talking about it. But the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage that happened, because, I mean, it was very local for us here. It was just, if you take a boat straight out, that's where it happened. And it was just, this fear of it being Russia. Like it was the whole moment of how it happened and how easy it was to catch on to that accusation that it was Russia, even though it made no sense that Russia would do it to their own pipeline. And people forgot that straight away. As soon as the war started and we joined NATO and the whole thing, which was a big part of it, this whole suspicion towards Russia. And then a year later, the Germans made an investigation, and now it was, established that it was actually Ukrainians themselves that did it. Ukrainians that sabotaged the pipeline. So anyway, I think that's a local one, but still just shows so much how a conspiracy theory accusation could just, I mean, both the versions are conspiracy because it was sabotage. So somebody must have done it. But I think it's a very good example of showing who you trust or don't trust really makes you, pick a side that maybe is not always the true version or the true explanation of what happened. That's one. But then the second one, I don't know, this is maybe more quirky or weird or niche that I think that people don't talk about, but like guilds, how they really, started as conspiracies in Europe. People, the tradespeople wanted to keep sort of the profession and the work. So they formed these guilds that were really conspiracies to kick out or to keep in, or to try to regulate the business, basically, and people not happy over that. And that just gave, it gave rise to institutions like universities and all kinds of things in Europe. So that, the whole thing started with conspiracies.
Yeah,
and people forget.
I mean, the role of the Freemasons, particularly in the English-speaking world in the 1960s and 70s, and the fact that being a Freemason on the police force suddenly meant that when you encountered a fellow Freemason who may have engaged in a little bit of light larceny or arson, or, maybe a bit of the old stabby murder, you go a little bit lighter on your fellow Mason. So the fact, these guilds not only started as in-groups keeping secrets from others, but then some of those guilds became actually quite powerful political forces in the 20th century. So yeah, Pat, do you have something similar?
I don't know if I don't have any local Canal Fulton, Ohio conspiracy theories.
Or at least that's what you want us to think.
There are plenty of local run-of-the-mill Canal Fulton, run-of-the-mill corruption stories. Various football players receiving, lighter punishments than non-football players type situations. But one thing I like to do that's I think sort of in line with this is I like to use, to the extent possible, like old historical conspiracy theories that people don't have any intuitions about. So things like, I always forget her name. Victoria Camille Pagan, I think her name is. She has a book.
So that's the Roman conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Stuff.
There's she has a book called Conspiracy Theory in the Ancient World, and like Greek and Rome. So I like to use stuff like that because, like, look, you might have intuitions about 9/11 or COVID, but you don't have intuitions about the Catalan conspiracy theory. And so I like to think about those sorts of things and trot those out. So if you ever encounter a paper where you're like, is this author talking about Assyrian conspiracy? That's probably me.
Yeah, I actually met her back at the Bilderberg Hotel when Michael Busser and Peter Knight held their conspiracy theory conference there. She was one of the attendees. An absolute delight to talk with.
Yeah, her stuff's really great. I feel the same way. The same thing is true. I kind of got into this because I don't like using modern day political examples because I think they make your paper bad and they date it too much, and people have intuitions about Trump stuff and anti-Trump stuff or whatever, but nobody has intuitions about the Marian reforms.
But Pat, can I ask you, why don't you want to have? Why do you want to emphasize things that people don't have intuitions on?
Oh, because I think because I have a lot of views that run counter to people's intuitions. I think we all do, but I think maybe that's becoming less true. But I also I'm just very weary of people using Trumpian examples and of people using political examples du jour. And so I try to use examples that show the things that I think are true that are not going to elicit a sort of immediate response from reviewers or from readers, because that's not what I want. Because I think I think that's noise in a lot of instances, and to the extent that I can minimize that noise, I think that's worth doing. Because I think examples are really important, and I think actual examples are really important. But actual examples that people have already made their mind up about, those aren't going to do me any good unless I'm saying the thing everybody's already saying, which I probably won't be.
Okay, yeah, I'm always jokingly saying, because I enjoy that. I like triggering people's intuitions and then showing them why they're not, as obvious as the intuition feels like, right? And I always joke, it did get Socrates killed, right, doing that thing. So maybe you're more wise to avoid those.
I'm not trying to remember.
Socrates was an asshole.
What did you say? That's what I asked.
I'm not trying to get killed. I'm not trying to not get killed. I'm just trying to get past reviewer 2.
Reviewer 2. We're all sometimes reviewer 2.
Probably so. There's a little reviewer 2 in all of us.
Unfortunately, that is true. And that, I think, brings us quite happily to the end of our discussion, which has been wide-ranging and not particularly contentious, but an exciting discussion. So I guess the question now is, what happens next?
Well,
that face is exactly how I feel.
Yeah. It is a cruel question to ask people having just finished a PhD in this day
I get that,
and age.
I get it on a daily basis.
Yeah.
What's next?
Right, so I am currently in a postdoc at the National Institutes of Health, which is pretty cool, in bioethics. I'm not a bioethicist, which is what's cool about this postdoc is they only hire people who aren't bioethicists because they want to teach you how to be a bioethicist. So that's fun. I like it here. It's good. The government shut down as of October 18th, 2025. So that means I just can't go to work. I just hang out at the house. So it feels a lot like grad school. But so after this, so this is 2 years. So after this, I would like to get a tenure track job. That would be good. I'd like that pretty well. I'm applying to jobs again this year. This is sort of like the under the hood stuff for all the people thinking about grad school. This is what you get to contend with. But yeah, I'm just writing some papers on misinformation and other related things. Some friends of mine and I are responding to Keith Harris's book, which has been fun. And yeah, I'll just apply for jobs again this year and just keep applying for jobs. We'll see what happens. Keep writing stuff. I'll keep thinking about stuff and sometimes writing that stuff down.
And Melina, how about you?
Yeah, I'm still trying to finish things that I'm really excited about to finish, like the research handbook on conspiracy theories that I'm co-editing with David Cody, and which both of you guys have a chapter in. even has 2 chapters. So I'm excited.
I managed to swing not 1 but 2 sites for that one.
Yeah.
Nice.
But I'm really happy about it, because they're both interdisciplinary as well, which is awesome. So I'm really excited and happy about getting that out. And then I have like a little trips, organized workshops and stuff that I'm still attending and going to. And in Sweden, we have something called prolongation. So if you've been teaching a lot and stuff like that, then you get prolongation time after you finish your PhD. So I'm still employed technically until June. So I have time to apply for new things. And I guess what I'm thinking about right now is if I should even, like, I hate that I'm even saying this, but if I'm going to be honest, I'm wondering if the best choice for me is to keep going in academia. So I really want to, and I can't see myself doing anything else. I think that's what I will be doing. But I think I need a moment of like existential crisis right now that I think it will be healthy and good for me in the end. But to just really know, to figure out what I want to do and continue with. But what I will be applying for is we have the Swedish Research Council have like a 3-year postdoc. And I feel like if I can make up a good enough project that I'm really burning for, or that I'm really passionate about, then I will apply for that. Yeah. And I have like 4 times that I can apply for it, I think. 4 years. 2 years, but it's twice a year. So
okay.
That's
yes.
it. But I'm really hating that question right now. It's really...
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not a good time for academia in general, whether you are a philosopher or not. Even the hard sciences, which historically were kind of protected by governments, particularly in the West, are seeing their dominance being challenged by governments, not just the US. We're seeing it in New Zealand and Australia, the UK as well. The entire academic system, as we knew it in the course of the 20th century, is changing and might be changing in a fairly permanent and drastic way. So whatever the academy looks like in a generation's time, we have come through a very tumultuous part. And yet, out of the chaos, excellent work has been produced by both of you. And I really hope there is going to be there's going to be a legacy of Pat Brooks and Melina Tsapos publications coming out well after I've retired in writing in this particular field.
Oh.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yes, you have to carry my flame.
Oh.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there will remain things to be said about this. And I do think that given the way the wind is blowing politically across the West, really, it does seem like a pretty good time to be a particularist. I think that, for good or ill, I think people are going to be like, well, look, the philosophers say that we're not always crazy. And I think it's not a bad time to be one such philosopher cynically, even if I do think that, particularism is true.
But like I even said it in my acknowledgements, and like sometimes I feel like because you've written so much on every single topic, when I think that I've thought about something original or new, then I'm sure you have like already written 10 articles on it. But I think that's also, I'm appreciating that so much because it's really awesome to have that as a reference catalog and go back to. But yeah, so it's a big flame to keep carrying, but it's interesting time still, like you said, to be a particularist. But I think it's an interesting time to stick true to what is the right thing to do as well. Because I find one thing that was surprising for me was how many people sort of play the game rather than are honest and truthful. And I think already from the beginning, the reason why particularism now is successful is because you did that, you and a few others. But yeah, so I'm really happy and I appreciate that so much.
Thank you. So with those lovely words, I shall bring this conversation to a close. Pat and Melina, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thanks.
Till next time.
And there you go. That's an interview. There were 3 of you speaking, no doubt about it. I really don't have anything. I have nothing of substance to say.
No, this is the point, Josh. I say, well, is there anything you want to take from that interview and draw attention to?
I mean, no. It was just a fun listen, and it's always good hearing new voices. I wish I could say something substantive, but I have nothing. It's one of those, you just listen and you nod, and I go, yeah.
So you didn't work out what the reference to My Beautiful Face is and the picture of a cat then?
No. And in my defense, I listened to the interview 2 weeks ago, so I remember the gist of it, but specific references are taxing my memory a little too much.
Then we must listen to the interview again.
Fine. But another time, because now we have to go and record a bonus episode to go along with this actual episode. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the Louvre. I think we have to talk about the Louvre.
Now, I should point out, when Josh wrote the notes for the bonus episode, the criminals had not been caught. And, of course, now the criminals have been caught. So the mystery of the Louvre burglary is nowhere near as interesting as it was when we first thought this would be a great thing to talk about for the bonus episode for this. So we have another little treat. We won't say what that treat is,
no, we won't,
because it might entreat some of you to find out what that treat is by becoming patrons of the podcast, by going to patreon.com, looking at the podcaster's guide to the conspiracy, and just flicking a little bit of money our way. Now, that's a digital flick as opposed to a physical flick. You can't use Patreon to actually transfer physical money from one location to another. That's called money laundering, and we're not engaged in that process. No, you'll be doing digital flicks, and those flicks will entreat you to treats.
And that's all we have to say, really. This has been a remarkably easy episode for me. Considerably more work on your end, but you're not me, I think, is the lesson we all need to take from this. Em is a separate individual from I am. Yeah, I think that's a moral worthy of going out on. Goodbye.
I am the Eggman.
Oh, you're not. You're the walrus.
Cuckoo Cachoo.
More like it. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy features Josh Addison and Associate Professor M.R.X. Dentith. Our producers are a mysterious cabal of conspirators known as Tom, Philip, and another who is so mysterious that they remain anonymous. You can contact us electronically via podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or join our Patreon and get access to our Discord server. Or don't, I'm not your mum. And remember, groove is in the heart.